Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I'd like to welcome you to a special 5-part podcast series on international due diligence investigations, finding the needle in the corporate haystack. This series is sponsored by Untitled Worldwide. Established in 1985, Untitled Worldwide has conducted over 2 million investigations globally. Untitled specializes in investigations for FCPA vendor risk management, mergers and acquisitions, transactions, board due diligence, and screening of executives internationally, in addition to routine background checks. Untitled has implemented tried and tested methodologies combined with new tools to reveal 30% more hidden and undisclosed information other than investigations. For more information, check out their website, www.infotal.com. Over the next 5 podcasts, we will be exploring such issues as when basic due diligence is no longer enough, given some recent government, FCPA, and international anti-corruption enforcement actions. What do CCOs need to know and want to know? What is and what is not working in due diligence investigations today? M&A successor liability issues, reputational damage, how they might be avoided by more robust investigative due diligence. And finally, with the changes in global policies regarding data privacy, the changes in technology with AI, what are some of the innovations and progress we will see in investigative due diligence going forward? Throughout this series, I am joined by Candace Tao. Candace is the founder and CEO of Untitled Worldwide. I know you will find this series useful and instructive. This series on international due diligence investigations, finding the needle in the corporate haystack, is a special presentation of the Compliance Podcast Network. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, back for episode 4 of our 5-part exploration of international due diligence, finding the needle in the corporate haystack. I'm joined by Candace Tao, the founder and CEO of Untitled, and today we're going to take up the always fun topic of current events, timely topics, reputational damages, M&A successor liability, etc. So, Candace, thank you for taking the time to visit with me today.
Thank you, Tom. Great to be here.
So, Candace, setting the stage with the criminal indictment last week of the founder of Autonomy, the CEO of Autonomy, for issues around the sale of his company to Hewlett Packard in the United States, where HP bought Autonomy for $11 billion, and then within 18 months had to write off $8.8 billion of that. I think sets a great stage for talking about how M&A can create nightmares, certainly for CCOs, but also for boards, reputational damage, and it's a great way to introduce this topic. So let me start with just M&A transactions. What do you see, and what do you advocate as the function of due diligence from the compliance perspective in M&A?
Sure, Tom. So the compliance aspect of due diligence in M&A transactions really takes a look at deeper dive level of due diligence. So again, due diligence investigations is sort of an overriding term for a number of different aspects of applications for due diligence. It may be M&A transactions, it may be board due diligence, it could be vendor due diligence, etc. So with mergers and acquisitions, both in terms of FCPA and just in terms of the acquisition itself, key aspects in terms of compliance would be taking a look at not only the company and its operations, its financial information, etc., but also its executives. Many companies haven't in the past, and only a few do still today, really do look at their executives. And this leads to a lot of problems later on, both in terms of FCPA violations and in terms of shareholder losses, market value losses, and a lot of deal volatility at all levels of M&A transactions. It's not just the very large ones, but at all levels. And so these are things that companies and chief compliance officers must take a look at. Have they done any due diligence on the company? Have they done any type of due diligence on the board of directors itself, on new board members? I would say that for any type of M&A transaction, that's important. Reputational damage issues, what can be found, what has been found. Are the directors or officers of the company involved in working with foreign officials, in some cases state government contracts directly? There's been a lot of compliance violations around chief executives who have misstated or ignored. There was even, I forget which was the company that had, where the president of the company had a president's account.
That was Panasonic Avionics.
It was Panasonic, yes. So they had a special president's account that nobody had insight to or review of. There were no accounting controls for that account, and he was able to very effectively, over many years, bribe foreign officials, and I think to the extent of about $31 million. And so no one knew about that until much later. And these are things that can be found. There are investigative due diligence, investigative analysis of facts is really the domain and specialization for investigators. And you won't typically find that through data aggregated information. And so I keep mentioning that because it's very misleading. 80% of information can be found through aggregated data sets. However, 20% of information can't be found. And information is not readily found on non-publicly traded companies either. So these are all factors that are very, very substantial factors for M&A, especially in terms of success or liability. Will the acquirer be responsible for the actions of the acquired company?
Candace, rarely have I heard someone advocate performing a compliance-focused due diligence on a board of directors of a target company. I've heard that around senior executives of a target company, perhaps key executives, C-suite members. But I heard you say something a little bit different. Why do you find that taking a look at the board of directors of a target company can give you insights around potential reputational and or legal risks?
Well, certainly included on most boards of directors would be the chief executive officer. So if a company is looking at the CEO, they might have some insight there. However, tone comes from the top in most organizations, and I think that's been pretty well documented. So if the board of directors have any issues that the company should be aware of, the acquirer should be aware of, certainly that would typically dictate tone at the top. A corrupt board of directors, or a board of directors that's turning away from a CEO that may be a particularly powerful personality, and so their actions are ignored or overlooked by the board. That would be of serious concern, I think, to most acquirers. And we've seen that a number of times ourselves, where even in very large transactions that are in the hundreds of millions of dollars or even over $1 billion in terms of the acquisition target, have seen board members or key executives who have relationships that the new company would absolutely not want to have on board in the new organization. And oftentimes those executives are hired on or become important shareholders in the parent company. And so that's a very serious issue that I think often is not addressed.
Candace, I started off this episode by talking about the HP acquisition of Autonomy. And in that case, HP was constrained by UK law from looking at transactional information from Autonomy. But it sounds like to me you are talking about a very different level of M&A due diligence, where you're not dependent on a target company's resources for you to data mine. You're going to, as you've suggested, really the internet, social media, or other media that's available that gives a much richer picture of a company, its board of directors, its senior management. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, definitely, Tom. We do find, in our experience, about 20% of executives don't check out. They have issues and problems in their backgrounds that the next company that hires them would not particularly want, or would not hire them based on those issues. And so there's a lot of information that can be found without the direct involvement of the acquisition target. In other words, there's a lot of information that we can find as investigators in terms of the due diligence that we conduct. And particularly if the acquirer shares some amount of the information with us. What are they concerned about in this particular deal? Are there issues that should be looked at more closely, rather than just sort of a clear slate of tell us what you find. We see that a lot. Tell us what you find, and then we'll make our decision. So it's more effective to shape due diligence of any type, but particularly for mergers and acquisitions. Are there any concerns that the company already knows about? We always ask our clients to let us know if there is a concern that we should know about their concerns, at least in some kind of neutral manner, not necessarily all the details and specifics. And then, there's a lot of information that we find that would not be obvious. So as much as we look at the information that's in front of us, so to speak, we do look at data aggregation, of course, because that's a basic type of information to start with. We do look at the deep media searches, deep internet searches. We look at every public record that we can find about the company and or its executives. But it's also about the things that you don't find. There is a thing called investigative hunch. So you expect to find certain pieces of information and you don't find it anywhere. What does that mean? Does it mean anything? Or is it something that's being covered up and potentially serious? And so there's a lot of different aspects to investigative due diligence, particularly on M&A transactions. And this is M&A transactional due diligence is where a lot of the FCPA due diligence of third parties is based on. And so we've been doing M&A due diligence, for example, for over 34 years. And so most companies today that are in the due diligence field ground their teeth, so to speak, on M&A transactions. And so, again, 20% of executives have issues that the acquirer should know about. 35% of third parties have corruption and bribery-related issues. There's a huge amount of hidden and undisclosed information that can be found on the deep, dark, and historical internet. And it's much, much greater type of investigative analysis than simple level 1 due diligence. Sorry if I went into that in a lot of detail there.
Not a problem, but unfortunately, we are at the end of our time. I've been visiting with Candace Tao, the founder and CEO of Infortal, and we've been looking at really some current events and timely topics around reputational damage and M&A successor liabilities. I hope you'll join us for our final episode, where we're going to take a look at some issues around global enforcement. Candace, I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Same here, Tom. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. Thank you for joining me on this episode of International Due Diligence Investigations, Finding the Needle in the Corporate Haystack. I hope you'll join me again tomorrow for our next episode. Also, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact Infortal at their website, which is www.infortal.com. This 5-part podcast series has been a special presentation of the Compliance Podcast Network.